This is Rally Round the Cannon, some thoughts on Princeton's history by somebody who should know better. There were many things to admire in Bill Selden of the class of 1934, who died late last year at a sprightly 97 years old, still with a smile and a grand worldview. In a pinch, I guess my very favorite was his equanimity. We from the 60s aren't usually big on dispassion. Far more of us tend to be in the camps of Steve Forbes or Ralph Nader than fall into any space midway between them. Whether Selden met either one of those folks, I have no idea, but he would have gotten along swimmingly with either one and have had a good time doing it. That's a fine trait. Not helpful in the cable news world, but something to be treasured in a historian or a friend. And he was a friend to every Princetonian, believe you me. In an absolutely unique two-part career, he both gave solace and direction to students in the midst of the Depression and the accumulated wisdom of centuries to their grandchildren in the Great Recession. While this was more a minor miracle than any deft trick on his own part, we do need to be grateful for our good fortune and treasure his substantial legacy. And substantial it is. Books on a wondrous range of Princetoniana done over the last 25 years. Books on Alexander Hall, all of Princeton's chapels, the early years of the Woodrow Wilson School. John Cleve Green, who you ask? Nassau Hall, the women of Princeton before 1969, the Nassau Club, honorary degree recipients, Prospect House, Princeton reunions, all other kinds of juicy things you always wanted to know, but never knew you wanted to know. And all this was a second career, at least chronologically. There was a brief 50-year interlude during which Selden was a renowned authority on the superstructure of higher education. This all began with a friendly invitation from the famed dean of the college, Christian Gauss, upon Selden's graduation in 1934, to be his assistant dean for a few years. Having no other job prospects, in 1934 you think, and admiring Gauss, Bill Selden took the job and applied his sense of order, seriousness, and fairness to the students who were, of course, at least 1 year younger than himself. In no time, he had his own verse in the faculty song. Selden tries so hard to be a model of propriety, a perfect dean with ne'er of ice, whose sweet goodbye is just too nice. In its usual pithy way, the song was spot on, and his very proper career progressed with stops at Brown and Northwestern, the presidency of Illinois College, then senior posts with accrediting and policy bodies that brought him back to Princeton Borough in 1965. He did educational studies everywhere from India to Trenton, meanwhile serving as a borough councilman and the founding president of the Princeton Arts Council. He wrote dozens of articles and studies in his field and volunteered for dozens more good causes. In the early 1980s, the folks at the Woodrow Wilson School wanted to commission a historical study of the school's beginning in 1930. Back in the day, Selden had been among the first of the School of Public and International Affairs majors, and his thesis advisor had been Harold Dodds, the first chair of the school and, in 1933, the new president of Princeton. Combining this with Selden's track record with Gauss in the 1930s and his broad range of publications, the Wilson Schoolers thought he'd be perfect for the history gig. It was a faculty song moment. Thus began Bill Selden's inspired Princeton writings. While it's entirely impossible to sense the breadth without digging through the archive's class of 1935 Princetoniana room, the calm sense of his insight can be readily gleaned just from his precise description of highly emotional topics. Listen to these. On reunions, he says, Princeton P-raids, which may extend for over 3 hours, might impress the uninitiated as being incongruent with the functions of a university. On eating clubs, he says, for a constructive dialogue to be conducted and a positive rapprochement to be attained and maintained, it is necessary that all parties involved have a common point of reference. On racism at Princeton, he says, the issue of whether or not to allow African Americans to become students at Princeton was more intractable and not resolved until after the middle of the 20th century. By this time, the Southern traditions that had pervaded the Princeton campus for 2 centuries had to a large extent been dissipated. During its early years, Princeton attracted a proportionately large number of its students from the southern states. Several of the presidents of the college were from the South, and in fact several of its presidents, possibly including Samuel Stanhope Smith, Witherspoon's son-in-law, owned slaves. It is therefore not surprising that the mores of the institution comported with the Southern traditions. I would like to say I could write that way, at least if I had to, but I honestly doubt it. Those who can should be treasured for their clarity, and thankfully Bill Selden was. He was chair of the Princetoniana Committee. He was given the Alumni Council Service Award in 2007 at 95 years old, with this appropriately succinct notation: your historical writings have given voice to many facets of the Princeton community. In the end, however, at long last I stumbled across what I now think of as the Secret Selden. It comes hidden in the epilogue of the very first Princeton book he undertook after his Wilson School Commission, the first topic of his own choosing, and an extremely challenging task: comparing the Princetons of 1884, 1934, and 1984 on the occasion of his 50th reunion. After telling the entrancing tale with typical exactitude, he muses uncharacteristically on the results of Princeton's rise to the upper reaches of academia over the century. Success in these terms, he says, carries with it concomitant responsibilities. The responsibility to avoid parochialism from specialization in research. The responsibility not to identify success too closely with authority, popularity, power, or wealth. The responsibility not to equate academic grades and test scores with character and integrity. And the responsibility to refrain from striving for more wealth than is appropriate or prudent, or can be employed conservatively and judiciously. Here's a locomotive for 34. Yours in virtual orange and black. This is Greg Lang of the great class of 1970. Rally Round the Cannon is a podcast from the Princeton Alumni Weekly online.